In this first video of our SAT Math Bootcamp, we're going to start at the beginning, start with the basics, and talk about the properties of integers. Now, integer is a word that you're going to see a lot on the SAT, so you kind of need to know the definition. And basically what an integer is all the whole numbers and their negatives, including 0. So if we have 0 here, we go from 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, and then also it extends in the other direction. Now, they go infinitely in both directions, right? So you have -5 and up, and 4 and 5 and up, right? So all of the whole numbers, positive and negatives, and including 0. Another way to think about it is it's not a decimal or a fraction. So if a question wants to know what is the smallest integer this answer could be, then you can't have the answer be 2.5 because that is not an integer, that has a fraction or a decimal attached to it. So now that we know something about integers, well, what about some of the properties of these integers? Well, first is odd and even. Now, I'm hoping you know the difference between an odd and even, but just in case, an even number is divisible by 2, so it would be 0, 2, 4, 6, and then also -2, -4, -6, and so on. And an odd is not divisible by 2. It'll leave a remainder of 1 whenever you divide it by 2. So that will include 1, 3, 5, 7, and so on. And then the negatives: -1, -3, -5, and -7. Now, what about just one other little detail? What if they tell you about consecutive integers? Well, if they tell you about consecutive integers, that just means in a row. So if they ask for, what are 5 consecutive integers? Well, then you could use anything, right? You could use 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You could use -7, -6, -5, -4. You could use 100, 101, 102. You get the idea, right? It's just 5 numbers in a row. Now, if they combine consecutive with even or odd, you just do the same thing. So if they ask for consecutive even integers, then you could do something like 2, 4, 6, 8. Right, and so on, or -6, -4, -2, 0. I mean, there's an infinite number of consecutive even integers, but you get the idea, right? They're going to be in order. And if it's odd, it'll be something like 1, 3, 5, 7, and so on. Now, what about adding integers? Now, this next section is something you don't necessarily have to memorize because you can always recover it, but by coming up with examples. But I'll just give you the general gist now. If you have an even and an even, you add them, you get an even. Now, an example of this would be something like, if you ever forgot this rule, just come up with 2 even integers and see what you get. So 6 plus 8, how about? That's 14, so that's even. An even plus an odd will get you an odd. And an example of this would be, 6 plus 7, that's 13, that's an odd. So you see, you don't really have to memorize these. You can just kind of think of them again if you ever need them. And that's just a general tip I can give you for the entire math section. If you don't want to memorize stuff, just come up with examples that you can call up and examine every time you need to remember the general rule. And then finally, odd plus odd, that's just going to equal even. And an example here would be 9 plus 3, that's going to give you 12. Odd and odd gives us an even. Now, a few other properties of numbers. I'm sure you know these. If you don't, then please remember these. Any number plus 0 will give the number again. This is the additive identity. You don't need to know that name, but so for instance, 8 plus 0 is 8, -3 plus 0 is -3, and so on. What about multiplication? Well, we can do an even times an even, and if we do that, we're going to get an even. And again, you don't have to memorize this, just come up with your own examples. So how about 10 times 4? That's going to be 40. There you go, even. How about an even times an odd? And that's going to get you an even. So say 6 times 7, that's 42, which is even. How about an odd times an odd? Well, that's actually going to get you an odd. An example of this would be something like 5 times 3, that gives us 15. So again, you don't have to memorize these relationships. You can just always call them up again by using examples. And then finally, a few multiplicative rules. Anything times 1 will give itself. That's a multiplicative identity. So 6 times 1 is 6, -7 times 1 is -7. And anything times 0 will be 0. So 4 times 0 is 0, 1,296 times 0 is 0, -1,296 times 0 is 0, and so on. And those are pretty much the number properties or the integer properties that you need to know for the SAT.